The grand hall of Velphara Prime stretched higher than any cathedral on Earth. Ambassador Taman walked through its massive doors with careful steps, his boots clicking against crystal floors that had seen 10,000 years of diplomatic meetings. Behind him, Nari carried a single datapad, her eyes scanning everything with the trained precision of a xenanthropologist. Who knew she was witnessing history? They were the first humans to stand in this place. The first of their species to be judged by the Galactic Council. Taman had expected many things. Suspicion, perhaps. Curiosity, certainly. Questions about human technology, human culture, human intentions. What he had not expected was laughter. The council chamber erupted with sounds that human ears struggled to process. Clicks, whistles, booming bass notes, and high-pitched chirps all blended into what could only be described as amusement. Hundreds of alien species, gathered in a semicircle of floating platforms, were laughing at the images displayed on the enormous holographic screen before them. The images were from Earth, from human history, from human mythology. Tay-Min watched as the screen showed ancient Greek pottery depicting Zeus throwing lightning bolts, then Egyptian hieroglyphs of gods with animal heads, Norse carvings of warriors fighting giant serpents, Chinese dragons controlling rivers, Hindu gods with multiple arms destroying demons. The images cycled faster and faster, pulling from every human culture across thousands of years. A tall, elegant being with 6 arms and crystalline skin stepped forward. This was Velphros, the council's senior archivist. His voice echoed through translation devices installed in every human's ear. Ambassador Taman, Velphros said, barely containing what seemed like amusement. We have studied your species for 300 of your years. We have observed your radio transmissions, your internet communications, your cultural output, and we must confess, humanity has provided us with endless entertainment. Nari's hand tightened on her datapad. Taman's expression remained perfectly neutral. Entertainment? Taman asked quietly. Indeed. Another voice boomed. This came from Quara, a massive creature that resembled a floating jellyfish made of purple metal. Your mythology wing in our archives is the most visited entertainment section in Council history. We have documented 847 spacefaring civilizations, and not one of them created such elaborate fantasy as humanity. The screen changed again. Now it showed humans fighting gods, humans flying on wings of wax, humans stealing fire from divine beings, humans building towers to reach heaven, humans surviving worldwide floods that covered entire continents, humans coming back from the dead, humans turning water into wine, humans moving mountains with faith alone. Look at this, Velphros said, his voice taking on a lecturer's tone. Your species claimed that beings could control weather, that individuals could destroy cities with their bare hands, that people could change their shapes, live forever, or return from death itself. You wrote these stories down. You believe them. You pass them to your children as truth. More laughter rippled through the chamber. Taman noticed that not all species were laughing. Some watched in silence. Some watched him, studying his reaction. Every species develops myths in their primitive stages, Quara continued. It is normal. It is expected. But humanity took myth-making to an art form. You didn't just create gods. You created entire pantheons. You didn't just imagine magic. You systematized it into schools and rules. You didn't just tell stories about heroes. You made them so powerful they became absurd. The screen showed Hercules holding up the sky, Samson pushing down stone pillars, Sun Wukong fighting entire armies of heaven, Gilgamesh wrestling with divine bulls. We evolved rationally, Velphros explained. We observed our worlds. We developed science. We understood physics and biology and chemistry before we reached the stars. But humanity? He made a gesture that might have been a shrug. Humanity created myths about breaking every natural law, and then you seemed surprised when those myths weren't real. The Council's assessment is clear, Quara announced formally. Humanity possesses adequate technology for space travel. Your mathematics is sound. Your engineering is acceptable. But your cultural development shows a species still clinging to primitive fantasy. Therefore, we offer humanity observer status in the Galactic Council. You may watch, you may learn, but you are not ready for full membership. The judgment hung in the air like a blade. Observer status was a polite way of saying humanity wasn't good enough. It meant centuries of waiting. It meant being treated like children among adults. Te-Min stood silent for a long moment. Nari watched him, knowing that look. She had worked with Taemin for 5 years. She knew what that particular silence meant. Honorable Council, Taemin said finally, his voice carrying across the vast chamber. We accept that you find our mythology amusing. We understand that you question our readiness. Therefore, we request the standard trials for species seeking full membership. Quara's form rippled with what might have been surprise. The trials are designed to test species at the limits of their capabilities. They are difficult, dangerous. Many species fail. We understand, Taemin said simply. Velthros moved closer, his multiple arms gesturing with genuine curiosity rather than mockery. Ambassador, I must ask, do you understand why we find your myths so entertaining? My people, the archivists, we are scholars. We have studied every species in this council. All of them developed myths about natural phenomena they didn't understand yet. Your people did that too. Thunder gods for lightning, sun gods for day and night. This is normal. He paused, and his tone became almost gentle. But humanity went further. You created myths about impossible things, physics-breaking things. You told stories about humans defeating death itself, about humans wielding powers that would require energy outputs equivalent to stars, about humans surviving extinction-level events and rebuilding civilization. Why did your species create such elaborate impossibilities? Nari's fingers moved across her datapad, taking notes. She was recording everything, but Taemin knew she was also restraining herself from speaking. This wasn't the time. Not yet. Te-Min looked up at Velthros, then at Kara, then at the hundreds of council species watching this exchange. His face showed something that might have been a smile. It was not a pleasant smile. Perhaps, Taemin said softly, we created those myths because we needed them. Needed them? Quara's voice carried confusion. Needed fantasies? We request the trials? Taemin repeated. When shall we begin? The council conferred briefly. Quara's voice returned, formal and slightly annoyed. The trials will begin in 1 standard week. You will be tested in 5 categories: strength, environment, intellect, creation, and medicine. Each trial is designed by species who excel in those areas. Prepare your best people, Ambassador. We will see if humanity's imagination translates to actual capability. As the session ended and the council chamber began to empty, Velthros approached Taemin and Nari once more. His tone was quieter now, almost concerned. Ambassador, I have spent 200 years studying human culture. Your stories are beautiful, even if they are impossible. I hope the trials do not damage your species' spirit. Observer status is not shameful. Taemin met the archivist's crystalline eyes. Thank you for your concern, Archivist Velthros. But I think you will find that human myths are more complicated than they appear. As they left the chamber, Nari finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. They have no idea, do they? No, Taemin replied. They think our myths made us weak dreamers. They don't understand that our myths made us survivors. Should we tell them? Taemin's smile returned, and this time it was almost sad. No, let them learn. The trials will teach them what words cannot. Let them see what humans become when we're challenged. Nari nodded and made one final note on her datapad. Council assessment. Humanity is primitive and imaginative. Recommended observation. They have fundamentally misunderstood the purpose of human mythology. Correction will be difficult, possibly traumatic for council species. Behind them, the screens in the council chamber continued displaying human myths, cycling through thousands of years of stories, gods and heroes, monsters and miracles. Death and resurrection. The council saw entertainment. They saw impossible fantasies created by a species that didn't understand reality. They were wrong. But they would understand soon enough. The trials would begin in 7 days, and humanity would show the Galactic Council exactly what. Species survived when their planet spent 300,000 years trying to kill them. The trial of strength took place on a barren moon orbiting a gas giant 3 systems from Velthor Prime. Hyan stood in the center of an arena carved from solid rock, his breathing steady despite the 40% heavier gravity. Around him, 5 other species waited for the trial to begin. The council had designed this trial specifically to humiliate humanity. Hyan knew it. Everyone knew it. The competitors were chosen from species with natural advantages, armored hides that could deflect plasma weapons, muscles dense enough to crush steel, reflexes so fast they bordered on precognition. Humanity's representative was a man who stood barely 6 feet tall and weighed less than 200 pounds. Krelix, the council's war master, watched from a floating observation platform. His species resembled 8-foot-tall praying mantises made of living stone. His voice boomed across the arena floor. The trial of strength consists of 5 combat scenarios: hand-to-hand combat, endurance under stress, survival in hostile conditions. Each competitor will face these challenges until they fail or until one remains standing. This trial honors species who claim strength in their mythology. He paused. Humanity claimed heroes who could level mountains and fight armies alone. Let us see if humans can fight at all. The first match began. A creature covered in metallic scales faced off against something that looked like a bear made of living crystal. The fight lasted 6 minutes and ended with both competitors bloody but functional. The crystal being won by simply outlasting its opponent's stamina. Then it was Hyan's turn. His opponent was a member of the Kreshtok species, 9 feet tall with 4 arms and skin like organic armor. The creature outweighed Hyan by at least 400 pounds. The signal to begin sounded. The Kreshtok charged immediately, confident that its mass and power would end the fight in seconds. It swung a massive fist toward Hyan's head with enough force to shatter concrete. Hyan wasn't there. He moved sideways, his body flowing like water around the attack. His hand struck out, fingers extended, and hit a point just below the Kreshtok arm joint. The creature's arm went momentarily numb. Hyan was already moving, his foot sweeping low, targeting the back of his opponent's knee. The Kreshtok stumbled but recovered, roaring in anger. It attacked again, this time with all 4 arms, creating a whirlwind of strikes. Hyan took 3 hits that would have killed most humans. His ribs cracked. His shoulder dislocated. Blood filled his mouth. He smiled. Then he attacked. What happened next made the council observers lean forward in their platforms. Hyan didn't try to match the Kreshtok strength. He targeted joints, nerve clusters, pressure points that the creature didn't even know it had. He used his opponent's momentum against it. He sacrificed defense for offense, taking damage to deal damage. Accepting pain to create opportunity, the fight lasted 11 minutes. When it ended, the Kreshtok was unconscious on the arena floor. Hyan stood over it, blood running from his nose and mouth, his left arm hanging useless at his side. He bowed respectfully to his defeated opponent, then turned to face Krelix. Human combat philosophy, Hyan said, breathing hard. We learned it fighting each other for 10,000 years. You don't need to be stronger. You need to be willing to do whatever it takes to win. Even if it breaks you. Krelix said nothing. He simply noted the result and called the next match. 2 days later, on an ice world where temperatures dropped to -100 degrees, the trial of environment began. The Ora stood with her engineering team in front of a pile of scrap materials. They had 6 hours to build a shelter that could survive the planet's night cycle. Other teams worked frantically, using advanced tools and material synthesis devices. Bora's team had been given primitive tools only. The Council's message was clear. Let's see how well humans survive without their technology. Let's see if your myths about controlling nature mean anything in real conditions. Bora looked at the scrap pile and started sorting immediately. We're not building a complex shelter, she told her team. We're building something simple that works. Look for metal sheets for basic structure. Insulation materials, anything fibrous. We need a heat source, so find chemical compounds we can burn or mix for exothermic reactions. Her team moved with practiced efficiency. They had trained for this. Every human sent to the trials had trained for this. The council thought this was a test. For humanity, this was Tuesday. 3 hours into the work period, a council observer landed near Biora's construction site. It was Velthros, the archivist, his crystalline form reflecting the ice world's blue sun. Engineer Biora, he said, watching her team work. Your methods are ... crude. Biora looked up from where she was welding metal sheets using a chemical reaction she had created from compounds found in the scrap pile. Crude works. Complicated fails. The other teams are synthesizing advanced polymer structures. They will be more comfortable. Comfortable doesn't matter if it doesn't work, Boa replied. Our shelter will function. That's all that matters. Velthros tilted his head. Your species really doesn't prioritize comfort, does it? Our species prioritizes survival, Boa said. Comfort is what you worry about when you're not dying. When night fell and temperatures plummeted, 3 of the 5 shelters failed completely. One team had to be emergency evacuated when their synthesized structure shattered in the cold. Another team's power supply failed, and they barely survived until rescue arrived. Bora's shelter, built from scrap metal and basic materials, functioned perfectly. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't comfortable. But it kept her team alive and operational. When observers entered in the morning, they found the human team doing maintenance checks on their equipment, preparing for the next challenge. The trial of mind came next. Sua represented humanity in strategic simulations against species that had evolved with naturally enhanced mental processing. The scenarios were impossible. Defend a planet against overwhelming invasion forces. Manage resource shortages across a dying star system. Solve diplomatic crises where every option led to disaster. Su approached each scenario the same way. She didn't look for the good solution. She looked for the solution that let something survive. In the invasion scenario, she sacrificed 70% of the planet's population to save 30%. In the resource crisis, she made choices that caused short-term suffering to ensure long-term survival. In the diplomatic scenario, she chose the option that made everyone angry but kept everyone alive. The council observers were disturbed by her choices. One simulation designer, a species known for philosophical thinking, confronted her after the trial. You condemned billions to death in your scenarios, the designer said. How do you justify such choices? Sua's expression didn't change. I don't justify them. I make them. Someone has to... In our history, we learned that sometimes the choice isn't between good and bad. Sometimes the choice is between bad and worse. Our leaders learn to make those choices. Our people learn to live with them. The trial of creation was where Biora's team truly shocked the council. They were given raw materials and told to build a functioning faster-than-light communication device in 8 hours. It was considered impossible. The technology required precision manufacturing, computer-aided design, and materials that took days to synthesize properly. Bora looked at the materials and smiled. We're not building their design. We're building ours. Her team worked without computers, without advanced tools, without the carefully planned approach the other teams used. They built rough, simple, and direct. They didn't worry about efficiency ratings or elegant solutions. They worried about whether it would work. At the 7-hour mark, other teams were still in the planning stages. Their computer models, showing they would need at least 12 hours to complete their devices. Bora's device sent its first signal at hour 6. It was ugly. The casing was exposed. The power routing was inefficient. By council standards, it was a failure of engineering aesthetics. But it worked. It sent a signal across 10 light-years and received confirmation. Kralix examined the device personally, his stone-like fingers tracing its rough construction. This should not function. The tolerances are wrong. The design is inefficient. By our standards, this is barely functional. But it functions, Bora said. That's the difference between our species and yours. You build things that are perfect. We build things that work. We learned that difference when we were building tools from rocks and wondering if we'd survive the winter. Perfect is nice. Working keeps you alive. The final trial was medicine. Jiho stood in a medical facility with 47 patients from different species, each one suffering from conditions their own species' doctors had declared fatal or untreatable. The test was simple: save as many as possible using any methods necessary. Jiho assessed each patient in under 2 minutes. Then he started making decisions that horrified the Council's medical observers. He performed surgery without waiting for full diagnostic scans. He used experimental drug combinations that had never been tested across species. He didn't ask for consent or explain his reasoning. He simply moved from patient to patient with absolute focus, doing whatever was necessary. When a medical observer tried to stop him from performing what looked like a dangerously aggressive procedure, Jiho turned to face them. In human medical history, he said quietly, we learned our craft during wars, plagues, and famines. We learned when the choice was do something risky or watch someone die. We learned that sometimes you have to break more to heal. Sometimes you have to hurt someone to save them. Sometimes you have to make choices without full information because waiting means death. Stand aside. By the end of the trial period, Jiho had saved 43 of 47 patients. The 4 he lost were the 4 whose injuries were genuinely beyond any intervention. The 43 he saved included cases that council doctors had studied for years without solutions. When asked how he achieved such results, Jiho's answer was simple. I wasn't trying to follow medical best practices. I was trying to keep people alive. There's a difference. Your medicine is for people who have time. Our medicine is for people who are dying. The trials ended after 3 months. Humanity had passed every single one. But they hadn't just passed. They had shown the council something that made them deeply uncomfortable. As Taemin stood before the council for the results, Krellick spoke with a tone that no longer contained mockery. Humanity has completed the trials. You have demonstrated capabilities we did not expect. But your methods disturb us. You fight like you're dying. You build like you're desperate. You heal like you're at war. Why? Taemin's answer was quiet but clear across the silent chamber. Because for most of human history, we were dying, we were desperate, and we were at war. Not with you. With our planet. With nature. With extinction. We learned these methods because we had to. Our myths didn't make us weak. They taught us how to survive the impossible. And now you're beginning to understand what that means. The council chamber had never been this quiet. Nari stood at the center of the holographic display system, her datapad connected to the council's primary archives. Around her, representatives from 847 species waited to hear what the human xenanthropologist had to say. 6 weeks had passed since the trials ended. 6 weeks of humans performing impossible feats while the council watched with growing unease. They had agreed to this presentation expecting more human eccentricity, perhaps some defense of their mythology, perhaps some explanation for why humans fought and built and healed with such desperate intensity. What they got instead would change how they saw humanity forever. Nari took a breath and began. Honorable Council, you invited us here believing we were a primitive species with overactive imaginations. You saw our myths as entertainment. Stories about gods and heroes and impossible events that proved we didn't understand reality. I am here today to show you that you were wrong. Our myths are not fantasies. They are memories. The holographic display activated, showing Earth from orbit. Beautiful blue and green, swirling with white clouds. It looked peaceful, perfect, like every other garden world the council had catalogued. Earth, Nari said simply. Our home. You observed it for 300 years and catalogued it as a Class 7 garden world. Stable climate, abundant resources, ideal conditions for evolution of intelligent life. Your assessment stated that humanity was fortunate to evolve on such a world. She touched her datapad. The image of Earth changed. Now it showed the planet covered in ice, glaciers stretching from both poles to the equator. This is Earth 20,000 years ago. Ice Age. Global average temperature dropped by 15 degrees. Most of the planet was uninhabitable. Human population bottlenecked to approximately 10,000 individuals. Murmurs spread through the council. Velthros leaned forward on his platform, his crystalline body reflecting the holographic light. Nari continued. But that's just the most recent ice age. In the past 2 million years, Earth has experienced 23 major glacial periods. Each one made most of our planet unlivable. Each one nearly drove us extinct. She paused. Our myths about endless winter? About the world freezing? About gods of ice trying to kill humanity? Those weren't fantasies. Those were instructions for survival passed down through generations. The image changed again. Now it showed a massive volcanic eruption, ash clouds covering half a continent. 74,000 years ago, a supervolcano called Toba erupted. It released 2,800 cubic kilometers of ash into the atmosphere. Global temperatures dropped by 5 degrees for 6 years. Genetic evidence shows that human population crashed to between 3,000 and 10,000 individuals. We nearly went extinct. Dong-Su, the human historian standing beside Nari, spoke next. His voice carried weight, each word carefully chosen. The Council archives document that every species in this chamber evolved on stable worlds. Your planets might have minor climate variations, occasional natural disasters, but nothing catastrophic. You evolved in safety? We did not. The holographic display began cycling through images faster now. Each one showed a different catastrophe. Asteroid impacts. Massive flooding. Drought periods lasting centuries. Diseases that killed 90% of infected populations. Predators that could crush human skulls with their jaws. Plants that were poisonous. Water sources that were contaminated. Environments that tried to kill humans in thousands of different ways. Every myth we created has roots in something that actually happened, Nari said, her voice growing stronger. You laughed at our flood myths. Every human culture has one. The Mesopotamians wrote about it. The Bible describes it. The Greeks recorded it. Chinese texts mention it. Why do all human cultures remember massive floods? The display showed geological data. Because they happened. Multiple times. When glaciers melted, sea levels rose by 400 feet. Coastlines where millions lived were swallowed by water in decades. To primitive humans watching the ocean consume their world, it looked like the gods were trying to drown humanity. She touched her datapad again. You mocked our myths about fire from the sky, about gods throwing lightning and burning cities. The display showed impact craters. Earth has been hit by asteroids and comets regularly throughout human history. The impact that killed the dinosaurs was 65 million years ago, long before humans existed. But smaller impacts? Those happened during human evolution. We have records of airbursts that leveled thousands of square kilometers of forest. To ancient humans witnessing those events, it was fire from heaven. Velthros stood from his platform. You are saying that human mythology is based on actual catastrophic events? Yes, Nari replied. But it's more than that. Dong-Su activated a different section of the display. Archaeological sites appeared, showing ruins far older than known human civilization. We found evidence of civilizations on Earth that rose and fell before recorded history. Structures that show advanced knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, engineering. Then they vanished. Sometimes from climate change, sometimes from disease, sometimes from reasons we still don't fully understand. The display showed genetic evidence, population graphs that crashed and recovered over and over. Humanity nearly went extinct at least 7 separate times. 7 times we were reduced to tiny populations of survivors. 7 times we had to rebuild everything from almost nothing. Nari's voice became quieter, but it carried clearly through the silent chamber. Our myths about gods walking among men? Those might be generational memories of survivors from previous civilizations, people with advanced knowledge trying to teach primitive survivors. Our myths about heroes fighting monsters? Those were real humans fighting megafauna predators that your species never encountered. Your worlds didn't have saber-toothed cats, cave bears, and giant crocodiles. Ours did. Our myths about resurrection and defying death? She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of dozens of different species. Those came from our absolute refusal to accept death. When plague killed 90% of a population, the survivors didn't give up. They kept going. They had children. They rebuilt. They told stories about people coming back from death because they themselves survived things that should have killed them. The display changed one final time. It showed a timeline of human development, but marked with red indicators showing extinction events, climate catastrophes, disease outbreaks, and resource collapses. The timeline was covered in red marks. So many that it seemed impossible. Any species could survive. Dong Su delivered the conclusion that the council had been dreading. Every species in this chamber evolved on worlds that nurtured you. Stable climates, predictable seasons, resources that were abundant and accessible. You developed civilization in safety. You had time to think, to plan, to build carefully. He gestured at the red-marked timeline. Humanity evolved on a world that tried to kill us in every possible way. Ice ages that lasted thousands of years. Volcanic winters that darkened the sky for decades. Floods that reshaped continents. Asteroids that burned forests. Predators that hunted us. Diseases that killed faster than we could understand them. Plants that poisoned us. Water that made us sick. We didn't create myths because we were primitive, he continued. We created myths because we survived things that shouldn't be survivable, and we needed to remember how we did it. We needed to teach our children that you can survive ice ages if you're clever, that you can survive floods if you move to high ground, that you can survive predators if you fight together, that you can survive extinction if you refuse to give up. The chamber remained silent. Species that had mocked human mythology days ago now stared at the evidence before them. Velthros spoke again, and his voice carried something new. Fear. What kind of species develops culture around surviving apocalypses? Taemin stepped forward to stand beside Nari and Dong Su. The kind that experienced them repeatedly. The kind that watched their world try to kill them over and over. The kind that said no to extinction 7 times. The kind that learned to pass survival wisdom through stories because writing and technology kept being destroyed. A new voice echoed through the chamber. It came from a platform that had remained dark throughout the presentation. Now it lit, revealing an ancient being that few council members had ever seen speak. Threndak, the High Observer, a species so old they had been part of the council's founding 10,000 years ago. I have lived for 6,000 of your years, Threndak said, its voice like wind through crystal caves. I have observed 847 species join this council. All of them evolved in stability. All of them developed science and reason in environments that allowed careful thought and long-term planning. Humanity is the first species we have encountered that evolved under constant existential threat. The ancient being moved forward on its platform, studying the timeline of human extinction events. This explains everything we have witnessed. The way you fight as if death is always one moment away. The way you build with desperate efficiency rather than elegant planning. The way you make decisions that prioritize survival over everything else. The way you train your children with stories about surviving impossible things. Threndak turned to face the council. Humanity is not primitive. They are adapted. Adapted to a world that kills. Every aspect of their culture, their psychology, their methodology exists because it kept them alive when nothing should have. Their myths are not fantasies. They are survival protocols encoded as stories. Quara, who had mocked humanity so confidently weeks ago, spoke with a trembling voice. But they seem so normal. They look fragile. How can a species that survives such horror appear so peaceful? Nari answered. Because we had to be. Species that remain in constant panic don't survive. We learn to be calm in the face of catastrophe. We learn to smile while planning for disaster. We learn to seem peaceful while never forgetting that extinction is always one bad year away. It's in our psychology now. Built into us through 300,000 years of practice. Dong Su added, you see our myths as stories about impossible heroes. We see them as reminders. Reminders that ordinary humans become extraordinary when everything depends on it. Reminders that you survive by working together, by being clever, by refusing to quit even when death seems certain. Reminders that every human alive is descended from survivors who beat odds that would make your species give up. The holographic display showed one final image. A genetic map of humanity, showing how every living human traced back through bottleneck after bottleneck. Each one a point where humanity nearly ended. The survivors of ice ages, the survivors of volcanic winters, the survivors of plagues, the survivors of floods, the survivors of drought, the survivors of predators, the survivors of war, the survivors of famine. You invited us to your council expecting to meet the dreamers you saw in our myths? Taemin said quietly. Instead, you met the survivors who created those myths. Every human in this chamber is descended from people who said no to extinction. That's not something that makes us superior, but it is something that makes us different. And now you understand why we fight like we're always dying. Because for most of our history, we were. The session ended in silence. No mocking laughter. No dismissive comments. Just hundreds of species sitting with the uncomfortable realization that they had invited something into their council that they didn't fully understand. As the humans left the chamber, Velthros approached Nari one final time. I spent 200 years cataloging your myths as entertainment. I apologize. No need, Nari said softly. You didn't know. Now you do. The question is what you do with that knowledge. I fear the answer, Velthros admitted. Because if your myths are memories, and your memories are of surviving extinction 7 times, then what happens when something threatens humanity an 8th time? Nari met his crystalline eyes. Then you'll see what 300,000 years of survival training produces. And I hope, for everyone's sake, that you never have to. The alarms that shattered the peace of Velthora Prime were designed to be heard across a planet. They had not sounded in 3,000 years. Most council species had never heard them outside of historical recordings. Wu Jin heard them from his quarters on the human diplomatic vessel. He was in the command chair within 30 seconds, his crew already moving to battle stations with practiced efficiency. Whatever training the council thought they had given their people, it was nothing compared to what humans did naturally. Captain, Su'a called from tactical. Multiple distress signals from council border stations. They're under attack. By what? Unknown contacts. Readings are ... strange. Biological signatures mixed with technological ones. They're consuming the stations. Literally consuming them. Wu Jin pulled up the sensor data on his main display. What he saw made his blood run cold. Not from fear, but from recognition. Humanity had fought things like this before. Not in space, but in principle, swarms, plagues, things that spread and consumed and couldn't be reasoned with. The communication channel activated. Krellix appeared, the War Master's stone-like features showing something humans had never seen before. Panic. Captain Wu Jin, the Council requires immediate assembly. All military assets are being recalled. This is a Category Omega threat. 15 minutes later, Wu Jin stood in an emergency council session. The chamber that had been so calm and orderly weeks ago was now chaos. Species were shouting, arguing, some were simply frozen in shock. The Devourer swarm has returned, Krellix announced, his voice cutting through the noise. The chamber fell silent. 3,000 years ago, it nearly destroyed the Council. It consumed 14 core worlds and 300 colony systems before we managed to drive it into dark space. We thought it was destroyed. We were wrong. The main display showed what the Council's sensors had detected: a mass of biological and technological horror spreading through space like a plague. Ships that looked like they were grown rather than built. Weapons that dissolved matter at the molecular level. And worst of all, intelligence. The swarm wasn't just consuming randomly. It was adapting, learning, targeting the Council's response with calculated precision. Our military simulations show 73% casualty rates, Krelix continued. We project losing 200 core worlds before we can contain the swarm. Our fleets are being recalled. Our defensive positions are being fortified. We are preparing for a war of attrition that will last decades. Wu Jin listened to the Council's plans with growing concern. They were thinking like people who had never fought a real war. They were planning defensive positions, calculated responses, minimal risk strategies. They were planning to survive. They weren't planning to win. Captain Wu Jin, Krelix said, his eyes finding the human in the crowd. Humanity is not yet a full Council member. You have no obligation to help us fight. However, if you do assist, full membership will be granted immediately. What is your answer? Wu Jin looked at Sua, then at the one who commanded the human marine contingent, then at the rest of his crew. They all nodded. They knew what needed to be done. We'll help, Wu Jin said simply. But under one condition, name it. Put humans in command of military operations. The Council chamber erupted. A species that had been members for less than a year, demanding to command the combined military forces of 847 civilizations? It was absurd. It was insulting. It was impossible. Krelix raised a manipulator limb for silence. Captain, our military leaders have thousands of years of experience. Our strategic computers are the most advanced in known space. Why should we trust humans with command? Wu Jin's answer was quiet, but it carried clearly. Because you've been at peace for 1,000 years. Your experience is in simulations and theory. Ours is in actual war. When's the last time any of you actually killed someone? The silence that followed was damning. No one had an answer. The swarm is a war of extinction, Wu Jin continued. It's not a political conflict or a territorial dispute. It's kill or be killed. You need people who understand that kind of war. Who fought that kind of war? You need humans. After 3 hours of debate, the Council agreed. Humanity would command the military response. They didn't have a choice. The swarm was spreading faster than projections predicted. Wu Jin's first command decision shocked every Council military officer. He recalled 90% of the defensive fleets. He abandoned fortified positions that had taken weeks to establish. He pulled back forces that were already engaging the swarm. Captain, this is madness, a Council admiral protested. You're giving the swarm free access to colony systems. Yes, Wu Jin replied calmly, studying his tactical displays. Because defending everywhere means defending nowhere. We're going to let the swarm advance. Let it spread. Let it think it's winning. You're sacrificing millions of civilians. I'm evacuating them first. Then I'm using their worlds as bait? Sua explained. Su stepped forward, her tactical display showing the swarm's patterns. The swarm consumes everything in its path, but it follows predictable patterns. It spreads to maximum resource concentration. It's efficient. That efficiency is its weakness. She highlighted several systems. We're seeding these abandoned worlds with automated facilities that emit high-energy signatures. The swarm will consume them first. While it does, we're building a kill corridor. The swarm will spread into a narrowing. Everything makes sense now. Everything has purpose. Nothing is wasted. Every aspect of human culture serves survival in some way. Even our entertainment, Taemin added. You thought our violent games and dark stories were barbaric. Now you understand their training simulations. Ways to practice survival scenarios in safe environments. Ways to remember that danger exists even in times of peace. Yes, and it terrifies us. Because we realize that the Council has forgotten how to survive. We've had 10,000 years of peace and prosperity. It made us complacent, soft. When the swarm returned, we nearly broke. If humanity hadn't been here. He left the sentence unfinished. Before Taman could respond, another figure approached. Threndak, the ancient High Observer, moved through the garden with slow deliberation. The being was older than most civilizations. It had guided the council through ages of peace. Ambassador Taman, Threndak's voice was like wind through caves. The council requests a private meeting with you before the ceremony. There are matters we must discuss. An hour later, Taman stood in a small chamber with the council's highest leadership. Only 20 species were represented here, the core members who made the most critical decisions. They looked at him with expressions that ranged from respect to unease to something approaching fear. Threndak spoke for them. Ambassador, we will be honest. The Council needs humanity in ways we did not anticipate. The swarm proved that we have forgotten how to face existential threats. Our military was designed for peacekeeping, not war. Our species have lived so long in safety that we no longer remember how to fight for survival. You want us to teach you? Taman said. Yes, but more than that. We want humanity to help reshape council culture. Not to make us human, but to remind us that the universe is dangerous. That survival is not guaranteed. That peace is something you maintain through strength, not something that simply exists. Krelix stepped forward. Since the swarm's retreat, 89 council species have requested human military advisors. They want to learn your tactics, your strategies, your methods. But more than that, they want to understand your mindset. How you think about survival. How you prepare for threats. How you accept necessary sacrifice. We are not warriors, another council member added. We are scientists, diplomats, philosophers. You are survivors. We need you to teach us how to survive. Taman looked at each of them carefully. What you're asking isn't simple. You can't just learn our tactics. Our whole culture is built on survival. Our values, our psychology, our social structures, everything evolved to maximize species survival. If you want to learn from us, you need to understand that it's not comfortable. It means accepting hard truths, making difficult choices, living with the knowledge that safety is temporary and peace must be defended. We understand, Threndak said. Or at least we are beginning to. That is why today's ceremony is not just about accepting humanity into the council. It is about acknowledging what you represent. A reminder that the universe is hostile and only the prepared survive. The formal ceremony began at midday. The Grand Assembly Hall filled with representatives from every council species. Thousands of beings representing trillions of citizens across hundreds of star systems gathered to witness humanity's formal acceptance. But before the official proceedings, Velthros requested permission to speak. He stood before the assembled council, his voice carried through translation devices to every being present. 3 months ago, I stood in this chamber and showed you all entertainment from the archive of human myths. We laughed at stories of gods and heroes, of impossible feats and survival against extinction. I told you that humanity's elaborate fantasies proved they were primitive. He paused, and his voice grew heavy with emotion. I was wrong. The council was wrong. We misunderstood everything about humanity. Today, before we formally accept them into our civilization, I want to correct that error. The holographic displays activated, showing human mythology again. But this time, the context was different. Zeus throwing lightning was shown alongside geological evidence of asteroid impacts. Noah's flood was paired with data on glacial melting and sea level rise. Heroes fighting monsters appeared next to fossil evidence of megafauna predators. Human myths are not fantasies, Velthros announced. They are memories. Generational trauma encoded as stories. Survival instructions passed down through extinction events. Every impossible tale has roots in something real, something their species survived and needed to remember. The display showed the timeline of human extinction events. 7 times humanity nearly ended. 7 times they survived. The chamber, which had been filled with mocking laughter months ago, now sat in absolute silence. We invited humanity to the council believing they were dreamers who needed to learn from our rationality. Instead, they taught us that we had forgotten the most important truth of existence: survival is not guaranteed. The universe tries to kill you. The only question is whether you remember how to fight back. Velthros turned to where Taemin and the other humans stood. The Archive of Human Myths has been redesignated as the Archive of Human Heritage. It is now council-classified material, not for entertainment, but for study, because humanity's myths contain survival wisdom that we desperately need to remember. The ceremony continued with the formal acceptance. Species after species stood to welcome humanity, but their words were different from standard membership ceremonies. There was no condescension, no welcoming of primitives who would learn from advanced civilizations. Instead, there was respect, gratitude, and acknowledgement that humanity brought something to the council that no other species possessed: memory of how to survive extinction. When it came time for Taemin to speak, he approached the central platform with Nari and Dongsu beside him. His speech was brief. "Honorable Council, you invited us here expecting to meet the heroes from our myths, the gods who threw lightning, the warriors who fought monsters, the survivors who defied death. You were disappointed when you met ordinary humans instead." He paused, and his voice carried clearly through the vast chamber. "But you misunderstood what our myths mean. We don't tell stories about superhuman heroes because we think we're special. We tell them because we need to remember that ordinary people become extraordinary when survival depends on it. Every human alive is descended from ordinary people who survived extraordinary circumstances. You wanted to know why our myths seem so violent and apocalyptic. Because we survived violence and apocalypses. We watched our world try to kill us in every possible way. And we said no. We faced extinction 7 times, and 7 times we refused to die. Our myths aren't about being strong. They're about being stubborn. About refusing to quit when every logical calculation says you should." He looked around the chamber, meeting eyes with representatives from hundreds of species. "We're honored to join the council. Truly honored. But we're also aware of what we represent to you. We're a reminder that the universe is hostile. That peace is maintained, not inherent. That survival requires constant vigilance. That safety is temporary. You asked us to teach you. We will, but understand that our lessons are not comfortable. They involve accepting that you might die, that your civilization might die, that everything you build might be destroyed, and then teaching you to build anyway, to fight anyway, to survive anyway." His voice became softer, almost sad. "Earth taught us one final lesson that we hope you never need to learn personally. The universe is always trying to kill you. The only choice you have is whether you're prepared when it comes. We spent 300,000 years learning that lesson. We hope sharing our knowledge means you don't have to learn it the hard way." The ceremony concluded with something unprecedented. Every species in the council stood in silence for exactly 1 minute. It was a gesture of respect reserved for moments of profound significance. They stood not in celebration, but in acknowledgement of what humanity represented. After the formal proceedings ended, Nari found herself in the archive with Velthros. The archivist was updating the entry on humanity in the council's primary database. Where it once read primitive species with overactive imagination, the new entry was far different. "Humanity," Velthros read aloud as he typed. "Death world survivors. Cultural memory spans multiple extinction events. Physically average but psychologically adapted for extreme survival scenarios. Mythology serves as encoded survival instructions. Military philosophy based on accepting necessary sacrifice. Engineering prioritizes function over form. Medicine developed under war conditions. Art and entertainment serve training purposes. Classification. Do not underestimate, ever." He looked at Nari. "Is this accurate?" "It's a start," she replied. "But you're still thinking in categories designed for species like yours? Humanity doesn't fit neatly into council frameworks. We're not more advanced or more primitive. We're adapted to different environmental pressures. That's all." "That's all?" Velthros repeated. Nari, you drove away the swarm in weeks when our projections showed decades of war. You saved the Council. That is considerably more than adapted to different pressures. Nari was quiet for a moment. We didn't save you because we're superior. We saved you because we recognized the swarm for what it was. An extinction threat. And we've been practicing responses to extinction threats for our entire evolutionary history. It's not about being better. It's about having relevant experience. She touched the data display, looking at the timeline of human survival. You want to know the real difference between humans and the Council? You evolved asking, how can we understand the universe? We evolved asking, how do we survive the universe? Different questions lead to different answers. Neither is wrong. They're just different. Outside the archive, humans and Council species mingled in the gardens. Hyan was teaching combat techniques to military officers from 6 different species. Bora was discussing engineering philosophy with Council builders. Jiho was sharing medical knowledge with physicians who were horrified and fascinated by human approaches to healing, but perhaps the most telling moment came when a young being from a Council species approached Taemin with a question that had been bothering them since humanity's arrival. Ambassador, if your planet tried to kill you for so long, why do humans still love Earth? Why do you speak of it so fondly? Why do your myths call it home rather than hell? Taemin smiled, and for the first time since arriving at the Council, it was a genuinely warm smile without any sadness behind it. Because Earth didn't just try to kill us. It raised us. It taught us. Every ice age taught us to adapt. Every predator taught us to be clever. Every disaster taught us to work together. Every extinction event taught us that survival is possible if you refuse to quit. We love Earth the way you love a harsh but fair teacher. It tried to kill us, yes. But it also gave us everything we needed to survive, including the lessons that let us stand here today, welcomed into a civilization of species that never had to learn those lessons. The being considered this. So your myths about Earth, about your gods and heroes, they're not just about surviving. They're about gratitude? In a way, yes. We're grateful to still be here. Every human myth is ultimately a celebration of survival. A reminder that we beat the odds. That we're still here when we shouldn't be. That's worth celebrating, even if the journey was hard. As night fell on Velthor Prime, Taemin stood alone in the gardens, looking up at stars that represented hundreds of civilizations. Behind him, the Council continued celebrating humanity's membership. Before him, the universe stretched infinite and hostile. He thought about Earth, about ice ages and volcanoes and floods and predators, about the 7 times humanity nearly ended, about the myths his species created to remember, to teach, to survive, and he smiled. Because humanity was here. Against every odd, despite every catastrophe, through every extinction event. They were here. They were survivors. And now they would help the Council remember that survival was not guaranteed. It was earned. The universe tried to kill humanity for 300,000 years. It failed. And now humanity would make sure the Council remembered how to fight back when the universe came for them too, because that's what survivors do. They survive. And then they help others survive. It's what Earth taught them. It's what their myths reminded them. And it's what they would teach the galaxy.